Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Amanda Castellano was explaining to the Blackfeet elder why his ghost stories were psychologically harmful when she saw Nathan Drake's corpse climb out of the lake behind him. It happened in absolute silence. No splashing, no gasping. Just the water parting as a figure rose from the depths of St. Mary Lake, backlit by the late September sun. The figure was human-shaped but wrong, skin the color of week-old bruises, bloated and swollen, moving with jerking puppet motions that no living body should make. Amanda's lecture died mid-sentence. The elder, Thomas Running Bear, age 73, traditional storyteller who'd been polluting tourists with superstition according to Amanda's complaint to park management, followed her gaze and went perfectly still. "You see him," Running Bear said quietly. Not a question. The figure on the lakeshore wore a ranger uniform. Waterlogged, torn, covered in something dark that might have been algae or might have been worse. As it turned toward them, Amanda recognized the face despite the bloating, despite the empty white eyes, despite the jaw hanging at an angle that suggested broken bones. Nathan Drake, missing for 3 weeks, presumed drowned after his kayak was found capsized near Wild Goose Island. SAR teams had searched for 9 days before calling it off. The lake was too deep, too cold. Bodies in glaciers' lakes didn't always surface. Everyone knew that. Except Nathan's body was standing 30 yards away, water streaming from its uniform, and it was looking directly at Amanda. "That's not possible," Amanda heard herself say. Her voice sounded distant, clinical, the same tone she used when debunking paranormal claims. Post-mortem gas formation can cause apparent movement, currents, decomposition stages creating. The corpse took a step toward them, then another. Its movements were stiff, mechanical, but purposeful, not drifting with current, not random post-mortem spasms, walking, deliberately, with intention. The smell hit them next. Decomposition, yes, but something else underneath, something older, like earth that hadn't seen sun in centuries. Like iron and ice and rot mixed together into a stench that made Amanda's eyes water. "We need to go," Running Bear said. His hand closed on Amanda's arm with surprising strength. "Now. We need to go now. That's Nathan Drake. He needs medical—" Amanda stopped. Medical attention for what? For being dead? For walking 3 weeks after drowning? She was a park ranger, not a horror movie protagonist. There had to be a rational explanation. The corpse's mouth opened. Water poured out. Then sounds, wet, grinding, like stones being crushed in a throat full of lake water. It might have been words, might have been Nathan Drake trying to speak. But whatever came out wasn't human language. Running Bear pulled Amanda backward. She stumbled, training warring with disbelief. You don't run from fellow rangers. You don't abandon someone who needs help. But the thing wearing Nathan's body took another step, and some primal instinct overrode all Amanda's rationality. They ran. Amanda had been a ranger at Glacier for 2 years. Before that, she'd spent 3 years at Denali and 2 at Acadia, 7 years in the National Park Service, and she'd built a reputation as the ranger who didn't tolerate nonsense. Ghost stories, cryptid sightings, UFO reports, Amanda shut them down hard. She'd written articles for park journals about the psychology of supernatural belief, about how isolation and suggestion created false experiences. She'd lectured at training seminars about maintaining scientific credibility. She'd been in Running Bear's camp explaining, condescendingly she could admit now, why his traditional stories about Draugr were harmful, how they scared visitors unnecessarily, how they promoted irrational thinking, how beliefs in the undead were just cultural explanations for decomposition processes people didn't understand. Now she was sprinting down the Going to the Sun road with a 73-year-old man, fleeing from her colleague's animated corpse. They reached Amanda's truck, a Park Service Ford F-250 with a radio, emergency supplies, and the illusion of safety. Amanda fumbled for her keys. hands shaking so badly she dropped them twice. Behind them, the wet footsteps continued. Steady, unhurried, patient. "Drive!" Running Bear shouted as Amanda got the engine started. "Don't look back, just drive!" Amanda threw the truck in gear and accelerated. The mirrors showed the figure still walking, still following, impossibly fast for something that moved so stiffly. It covered ground like distance meant nothing, like physics itself had stopped applying. "What the hell was that?" Amanda's voice cracked. "What the hell was that?" "Draugr," Running Bear said. His breathing was labored, but his voice was steady. "My people have stories. The Norse settlers brought their dead with them, buried them in sacred ground without permission. Some burials, the dead don't rest, they guard, they hunt, they remember insults. That's not Nathan was my friend, he drowned. This is just..." Amanda's mind raced, trying to fit what she'd seen into any framework that made sense. Hallucination, carbon monoxide, gas leak in the truck. We're both. "You can't logic your way out of what you saw," Running Bear interrupted. "I know you think my stories are primitive superstition. You made that very clear in your complaint to the superintendent. But that thing back there doesn't care about your degrees or your rationality. It just knows you're in its territory." Amanda drove for 5 miles before her hands stopped shaking enough to reach for the radio. "Base, this is Ranger Castellano. I have a situation near St. Mary Lake requesting immediate supervisor contact." Static. Then, "Castellano, this is Base. Go ahead. How did you report this? How did you say Nathan Drake's corpse is walking around without sounding insane?" I've encountered something unusual. Requesting backup at my current location. Going to the Sun Road, mile marker 47. What's the nature of the situation?" Amanda looked at Running Bear. He shook his head slowly. "They won't believe you," he said. "And if that Draugr is still active, you'll be sending more rangers to their deaths. Base, I need to come into the station. In-person report. It's complicated." A pause. "Copy that. Report to West Glacier Station. Supervisor Miller will meet you there." Amanda drove the remaining 30 miles in silence. Running Bear sat rigid in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the mirrors. The September afternoon had turned gray, clouds moving in from the west. Storm season in Glacier. Soon the Going to the Sun Road would close for winter, buried under snow until next June. At the West Glacier Station, Supervisor Miller, 56, 30 years with the Park Service, no patience for drama, met them in the parking lot. His expression suggested he'd already decided Amanda was wasting his time. "Castellano, you pulled yourself off patrol for what exactly?" Amanda took a breath. "Rational, professional, just report the facts." "I witnessed what appeared to be Nathan Drake emerging from St. Mary Lake. The figure matched his description but showed signs of advanced decomposition. It moved toward me in a threatening manner. I evacuated with Mr. Running Bear and returned here to report." Miller's expression didn't change. "You saw a body in the lake." "I saw a body walking out of the lake. Walking. Moving deliberately. And you immediately assumed it was Nathan Drake, who's been missing for 3 weeks." I recognized his face, his uniform. It was him. Miller sighed. "Castellano, I'm going to say this kindly. You've been working double shifts since Nathan disappeared. You've been vocal about stress in the workplace. You filed multiple complaints about," he glanced at Running Bear, "cultural practices you disagree with. I think you need some time off. I know what I saw. I'm sure you do. But what you saw, and what actually happened, might be 2 different things. Could have been a hiker in similar clothing. Could have been someone pulling a sick prank. Could have been," he paused delicately, "stress manifesting as visual experiences. It happens, no shame in it." "I saw him too," Running Bear said. "We both did. Same thing. Same time." Miller's expression suggested this made things worse, not better. "Mr. Running Bear, with all respect, you have a documented history of sharing stories about undead spirits in the park. I appreciate your cultural traditions, but they're not evidence." "So we're both hallucinating," Amanda said flatly, simultaneously, the same detailed hallucination. I'm saying you should take a week off, see the park counselor, get some perspective. Miller's tone said the discussion was over. I'll have another ranger check the St. Mary area. If there's anything unusual, we'll investigate properly. Amanda wanted to argue, wanted to demand they take her seriously, but she could see it in Miller's eyes. He'd already decided. The scientific ranger who didn't believe in ghosts was now reporting ghost sightings. The irony was too perfect. Her own reputation had trapped her. Fine, she said. I'll take the week. Running Bear gave her his phone number as they left the station. You'll need this. When it comes back, and it will come back, they won't help you, won't believe you. You'll need someone who understands. Understands what? That Norse zombies are real? That everything I've built my career on is wrong? Understands that the world is larger than what you permit yourself to see. Running Bear's eyes were kind, but firm. You spent 2 years telling everyone that our stories were superstition, that the spirits weren't real, that the land had no memory and the dead stayed dead. Now you know better. Question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Amanda drove home to her cabin near Lake McDonald, small, isolated, provided by the Park Service. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, and a view of the mountains that had made her fall in love with Glacier 2 years ago. She tried to sleep. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Nathan's corpse rising from the lake, saw the water streaming from his mouth, saw those white, empty eyes tracking her. At 2 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello? Wet breathing. Then that same grinding sound she'd heard at the lake. Stones in a throat, water in lungs, something trying to speak through a body that no longer worked properly. Amanda hung up. The phone rang again immediately. She turned it off. 3 minutes later, someone knocked on her cabin door. Amanda grabbed the Glock 22 she kept in her nightstand. Park rangers weren't typically armed, but Amanda had gotten special permission after a bear incident last year. She approached the door slowly, weapon ready. The knocking continued. Steady, patient, insistent. Who is it? No answer, just more knocking. Amanda looked through the peephole. Saw nothing. The porch light illuminated an empty stoop. But the knocking continued, and she could hear wet footsteps on the wooden boards. She backed away from the door. Called 911 on her landline. The dispatcher was professional, calm. She'd send a deputy. 15-minute ETA. Stay inside. Stay calm. The knocking stopped. Amanda listened, gun held in both hands, every nerve screaming. Outside, something heavy dragged across the porch. The sound moved around the cabin, circling, testing windows, finding weaknesses. Amanda's cabin had 4 windows, 2 in the bedroom, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the bathroom. All locked, all covered with curtains. But she could track the thing's movement by sound. Wet, heavy, methodical. It reached the kitchen window. Stopped. Amanda heard fingernails, or something like fingernails, scraping against glass. Then silence. Amanda stood in her living room for 10 minutes, gun pointed at nothing, listening to her own heartbeat. The deputy arrived exactly on schedule. Sheriff's Deputy Morrison, late 40s, competent and thorough. He checked the perimeter, found nothing. No footprints despite the muddy ground. No signs of forced entry. No evidence anyone had been there at all. You sure you're okay? Morrison asked. Miller mentioned you'd had a stressful day. Of course, Miller had called ahead, prepared everyone to dismiss her. I'm fine. I heard something. I was wrong. Thank you for checking. Morrison left. Amanda sat on her couch, gun in her lap, and watched the windows until dawn. She called Running Bear at 7 a.m. You said it would come back. You were right. What do I do? You learn, Running Bear said. You listen to the stories you've been dismissing. You understand what you're dealing with. They met at his house, a modest home near the eastern border of the park, walls covered with photographs and traditional artwork. Running Bear's wife made coffee while he pulled out books, Old books. Some in English, some in Norwegian, some in languages Amanda didn't recognize. The Norse brought their honored dead with them when they settled, Running Bear explained. Buried them in high places, sacred ground, places of power. Your colleague, where did he die? St. Mary Lake, near Wild Goose Island. Running Bear pulled out a map, old and hand-drawn. This is from my grandfather's grandfather. Shows the sacred sites, the places where the veil is thin, where spirits walk. He pointed to St. Mary Lake, a circle drawn in faded ink. Burial ground. Vikings maybe, or others before them. The land remembers. Nathan wasn't Viking. He was from Oregon. He drowned accidentally. The Draugr doesn't choose who it claims. It guards what's buried. Your friend died in its territory, and now his body serves its purpose. Running Bear looked at Amanda seriously. It will hunt you because you trespassed, because you disturbed what should not be disturbed, because you came to its sacred ground with disbelief and disrespect. I was just doing my job. Your job was to mock my stories, to tell visitors that the spirits weren't real, to laugh at the idea that some places are dangerous not because of bears or avalanches, but because the dead walk there. Running Bear's voice wasn't angry, just sad. You made yourself an enemy of the old ways. The Draugr knows this. It will not rest until you acknowledge what you denied. How do I stop it? You don't. You can't kill what's already dead. Running Bear pulled out another book, this one in Norwegian. But you can appease it. You can show respect. You can acknowledge the sacred ground and promise to protect it, not desecrate it with skepticism. Amanda spent 3 days researching, reading books she'd have dismissed as folklore nonsense a week ago, learning about Draugr, the Norse undead, guardians of burial mounds, creatures of immense strength and singular purpose. They guarded treasure, protected sacred sites, punished transgressions against the old ways. They couldn't be killed by conventional weapons. Fire sometimes worked, decapitation and burning the head separately. Or, according to some sources, acknowledgement, respect, treating the burial ground as sacred instead of denying its significance. On the 4th night, Amanda returned to St. Mary Lake, alone, against every instinct and regulation. She parked at the trailhead and hiked the 1/4 mile to the shore, carrying nothing but a flashlight and the knowledge that she'd been catastrophically wrong about everything she'd believed. The lake was perfectly still, dark water reflecting nothing. The air smelled of ice and pine, and underneath it all, that same ancient earth scent she'd smelled on the Draugr. "Nathan," Amanda called. Her voice echoed across the water. "If you're here, if you can hear me, I need you to know something." Silence. Just the lap of small waves against the shore. "I was wrong," Amanda continued. "About the stories, about the sacred ground, about all of it. I thought I was being scientific, rational, but I was just being arrogant. I dismissed things I didn't understand and called it critical thinking." The water began to move, not wind-driven, something below the surface, moving toward shore. Amanda's hands shook, but she didn't run. "This place is sacred. Whatever's buried here deserves respect. I was wrong to deny that. I'm sorry." Nathan's body rose from the lake. Slower this time, less aggressive. The bloated flesh was worse than before, decomposition accelerating even in the cold water, but the eyes, still white and empty, seemed almost curious. "I'll make sure this place is protected," Amanda said. "No more tourists, no more campgrounds nearby. I'll work with the tribe, with Running Bear, to make sure people understand this isn't just a lake. It's a burial ground. It's sacred. I'll spend the rest of my career making sure no one disrespects it again." The Draugr stood 10 feet from her. Water streamed from its uniform. That grinding sound came from its throat again, but softer, less threatening. Amanda still couldn't understand the words, if they were words, but the tone had changed. It reached out one swollen hand, pointed past Amanda, toward the forest. "You want me to see something?" The Draugr didn't respond, just stood there, arm extended, pointing. Amanda followed the direction. Her flashlight found a trail she'd never noticed before. Overgrown, barely visible, leading into the trees, a path that wasn't on any park map. "You want me to follow that?" The drogger's arm lowered. It turned, walking back into the lake. This time Amanda watched it descend, saw it sink below the surface slowly, deliberately, until only ripples remained. She stood alone on the shore, shaking, alive. The next morning, Amanda returned with Running Bear and 2 other Blackfeet elders. They hiked the trail the drogger had indicated. It led half a mile into the forest, climbing into the mountains, ending at a clearing Amanda had never seen in 2 years of patrol. The clearing held stones, dozens of them, arranged in patterns that suggested graves. Old graves. Very old. The stones bore markings, some Norse runes, some native symbols, some she couldn't identify. A burial ground that predated park maps, predated modern surveys, predated the National Park Service itself. "This is what he guards," Running Bear said quietly. "This is what you denied existed." They spent 2 weeks documenting the site. Amanda filed reports, pushed through bureaucratic resistance, fought with park management. She'd been the scientific, rational ranger, and now she was demanding they recognize a sacred burial ground based on supernatural guidance. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but the evidence was undeniable. The stones were real. The markings were authentic. Archaeological surveys confirmed the site was at least 800 years old. Pre-contact indigenous burials mixed with what might have been Norse settlers, creating a truly unique historical site. Glacier National Park established a protection zone around St. Mary Lake. No camping within a mile of the burial ground. No trails leading to the site. Traditional Blackfeet ceremonies would be held to honor the dead. And Amanda Castellano, former skeptic, would oversee the protection personally. Nathan Drake's body was never recovered. The search was officially called off after 30 days. Amanda attended the memorial service and said nothing about what she'd seen. What would she say? That Nathan was still there, still walking, still guarding the burial ground in death as he hadn't known to do in life. She visited St. Mary Lake once a month, always at night, always alone. Sometimes she saw the drogger, Nathan's shape rising from the water, watching, ensuring the sacred ground remained protected. Sometimes she just stood on the shore and felt the presence, the weight of centuries, the dead who remembered when the living had forgotten. Running Bear died 2 years later, peacefully, surrounded by family. Amanda spoke at his funeral about how he'd taught her that some knowledge couldn't be measured or quantified. That skepticism without humility was just another form of blindness. That the world was stranger and more terrible and more wondrous than she'd ever permitted herself to believe. She never mocked another ghost story, never dismissed another cultural tradition, never again assumed that her education made her wiser than people who'd lived with the land for generations. Because she'd seen the drogger. She'd looked into the empty eyes of a walking corpse and understood that reality was not limited by her ability to accept it. The dead could walk. The sacred ground demanded respect. And some rangers, after drowning, continued their patrol in forms that defied every natural law. Amanda Castellano kept the burial ground protected for 17 more years. She retired in 2036, having spent nearly 2 decades as Glacier's most vocal advocate for respecting indigenous traditions and folklore. Young rangers joked that she'd gone native, that isolation had made her superstitious. She never corrected them, just told them to be careful near St. Mary Lake, to respect the water, to remember that some places weren't safe not because of natural dangers, but because the dead walked there, guarding treasures that predated maps and science and rational thought. Most of them dismissed her warnings, just like she once had. Amanda hoped they'd never learn the truth the way she had. Hoped they'd never see what climbed from the lake on cold September nights when the veil was thin and the drogger remembered its purpose. But if they did, if some arrogant young ranger with degrees and confidence someday found themselves face to face with impossible horror, Amanda had left instructions, numbers to call, elders to contact, ways to survive an encounter with something that shouldn't exist, because the world was stranger than most people would ever know, and some lessons could only be learned through terror, The drogger still walked. Nathan Drake's body still guarded the burial ground. And Amanda Castellano, who'd once been so certain she knew everything, had learned the most important lesson of all: humility in the face of mystery, respect for what you don't understand, and never, never assume that death means the end of duty. Some rangers patrolled forever, some guardians never rested, and some sacred grounds demanded protection long after the living had stopped believing they existed. Amanda believed, and belief, she'd learned, was its own form of sight. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. Emily Sorensen found the first symbol carved into her truck's hood at dawn. 3 interlocking circles filled with something that looked like dried blood but smelled like burnt hair. She stood in the parking lot of the Jenny Lake Ranger Station, coffee cooling in her hand, staring at the vandalism. The circles were precise, carved deep into the paint with something sharp. In the center of each circle, a different symbol. One looked like an inverted cross. One resembled a crude eye. The third was unfamiliar, jagged lines radiating from a central point like a malformed star. Emily's first thought was kids. Her second thought was cult nonsense. Grand Teton attracted its share of New Age types, crystal healers, self-proclaimed shamans. Her third thought, the one that made her hands shake, was that someone had done this while she slept inside the ranger station, 20 feet from where she'd been sleeping. Close enough to touch her truck, close enough to do worse. She pulled out her cell phone. No signal. Standard for this part of the park in 2003, coverage was spotty at best, non-existent in the backcountry. She'd have to use the landline inside to report the vandalism. But first, she took photographs. Digital camera, Park Service issue. Documented the damage from multiple angles, the way the blood had pooled in the carved grooves, the precision of the symbols, the fact that her truck was the only one vandalized. 3 other vehicles in the lot remained untouched. Inside, she called her supervisor, got voicemail, left a message. "Peterson, it's Sorensen. Someone vandalized my truck overnight, carved symbols into the hood. Looks like, I don't know, some kind of ritual markings. Need to file a report." She hung up and immediately dialed another number. Her landline at home in Jackson, 20 miles south. Her daughter Mia answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom? Hey, sweetie, just checking in. You okay?" It's 6 in the morning. Mia was 13, old enough to stay alone when Emily pulled overnight shifts, but young enough that Emily worried constantly. Single-parent math. Work enough to pay rent, but not so much you become an absent mother. The balance never worked. "I know, sorry. Just wanted to hear your voice." Emily didn't mention the vandalism, didn't mention that someone had been close enough to her truck to carve threats into it. "Mrs. Chen is still picking you up for school, right?" "Yeah, at 7:30. A pause. "Mom, are you okay? You sound weird." "I'm fine, just tired. Long night. I love you." "Love you too." Emily hung up and stared at her truck through the window. The symbols caught the early morning light, throwing strange shadows. She'd worked for the National Park Service for 6 years. 3 at Rocky Mountain, 3 here at Grand Teton. She'd dealt with drunk tourists, aggressive wildlife, search and rescue operations in blizzards. She'd never felt unsafe at work. Until now. The feeling of being watched crawled up her spine. Emily turned slowly, scanning the parking lot, the tree line beyond. Nothing moved. Just lodgepole pines swaying in the September breeze. But the feeling persisted, eyes on her back, invisible but intense. Her radio crackled. "Sorensen, this is Peterson. Got your message. What the hell happened?" Emily grabbed the radio. "Someone vandalized my truck, carved symbols into the hood. Happened overnight while I was inside the station." "Symbols? What kind of symbols?" "Religious looking. Occult, maybe. 3 circles with markings inside." Emily hesitated. "And something that looks like blood." Silence. Then, "I'll send Deputy Morrison to take a report. Don't touch anything, and Sorensen, maybe consider staying somewhere else tonight. If someone got that close to your vehicle..." "I can't afford a hotel, Peterson. You know that. Single mother on a ranger's salary. Every dollar counted. The Park Service housing was supposed to be available, but the wait list was 2 years long. So Emily commuted from Jackson, stayed overnight at the station when she pulled doubles, and tried not to think about how tight the budget was. Just be careful. Morrison will be there in an hour." Deputy Morrison arrived 90 minutes later. Mid-50s, competent, but his expression when he saw the symbols made Emily's unease deepen. "You recognize these?" she asked. Morrison photographed the damage, measured the carvings, took samples of the substance in the grooves. "I've seen similar markings before. Not here. Over in Teton Village couple years back. Someone was leaving them on doors, mailboxes. We never caught who." "What do they mean?" Morrison glanced at her, then away. "You ever hear stories about the Romanian family that settled near Jackson in the 1890s? Emily shook her head. "They came over during the immigration wave. Brought their traditions with them. Their beliefs." Morrison's voice dropped. "Their superstitions. There's folks around here, descendants mostly, who still practice the old ways. Animal sacrifice, protection rituals, marking territory." "This is marking territory. This is marking you." Morrison met her eyes. "These symbols, they're from Strigoi folklore. Romanian vampire legends. The marks ward off Strigoi, or summon them depending on who's doing the marking and why." Emily laughed, but it came out hollow. "You're saying someone thinks I'm a vampire?" "I'm saying someone's sending you a message. And in my experience, people who carve symbols into vehicles at night aren't playing around." Morrison closed his notepad. "You have any enemies? Anyone with a grudge?" Emily thought about it. She'd given citations to hikers for illegal camping. She'd enforced fire restrictions. She'd argued with locals about off-trail access. But nothing that would provoke this. "No," she said. "Nothing serious." Morrison looked skeptical but didn't push. "I'll file the report. Get your truck to a body shop when you can. And if you see anything else suspicious, more symbols, anyone following you, call immediately." After Morrison left, Emily tried to work. She had trail inspections scheduled, a group permit to process, routine maintenance on the ranger station. But she couldn't focus. The symbols on her truck hood kept pulling her attention. 3 circles, 3 warnings, 3 threats. At noon, she found the second symbol. This one was carved into the door of the supply shed behind the station. Same 3 circles, same precise cuts, same substance filling the grooves. But this time there was something else. A name scratched below the circles. Olivia Rhodes. Emily's blood went cold. Olivia Rhodes had been a ranger at Grand Teton. Past tense. She'd disappeared 8 months ago during a winter patrol. Search teams had found her truck abandoned near Death Canyon. Her equipment scattered, but no sign of Olivia herself. The official assumption was accident, fell into a crevasse, buried by an avalanche, consumed by the wilderness that claimed lives every year despite precautions. But the investigation had been odd. Locals had been uncooperative. Witnesses had changed their stories, and there were rumors, whispers Emily had dismissed as small-town gossip, that Olivia had gotten involved with something she shouldn't have, had asked questions about traditions that weren't meant for outsiders. Emily photographed the carving and called Morrison again. This time he sounded worried. "Don't go anywhere alone," he said. "Someone's escalating. First your truck, now this. They're connecting you to Olivia Rhodes." "Why?" "I barely knew her. We overlapped for maybe 2 months before she disappeared." "Doesn't matter. Someone thinks there's a connection. Someone thinks you're..." Morrison trailed off. "Thinks I'm what?" "Following the same path. Asking the same questions. Becoming the same problem." Morrison sighed. "Listen, there's things about this area most outsiders don't understand. Old families, old practices. They don't take kindly to park rangers poking into local business. I'm not poking into anything. I'm just doing my job. That's what Olivia said. Morrison's voice was grim. And look what happened to her. Emily spent the afternoon researching. She used the ranger station's ancient desktop computer and dial-up internet to search for information about Strigoi folklore. What she found made her skin crawl. Strigoi, Romanian vampiric creatures. Unlike Western vampires, Strigoi retained their intelligence, their personality, their memories. They could walk in daylight, could pass as human, could live among communities for years before being discovered. They returned from death to torment specific people, family members, enemies, anyone who'd wronged them in life. The folklore described ways to create Strigoi: dying with unfinished business, dying violently, dying with a curse, and ways to destroy them: stake through the heart, decapitation, burning. But first, you had to identify them. And that required vigilance, because Strigoi were cunning. Emily found references to Strigoi cults, communities that protected the undead, worshipped them, fed them. In exchange, the Strigoi granted favors, protection, power over enemies. She found historical records of Romanian settlements in Wyoming in the 1890s. Families fleeing persecution, bringing their beliefs with them, establishing isolated communities where old traditions survived when they died out in Europe. And she found something else. A forum post from 2002, anonymous, describing strange occurrences in the Grand Teton area. Hikers reporting being followed. Rangers finding animal carcasses drained of blood. Locals warning visitors to stay on marked trails, to never wander alone at night, to ignore any calls for help coming from the forest. The post ended with a warning. If you see the symbols, run. If they mark you, you're already chosen. Emily's phone rang. The landline, not her cell. She answered, expecting Peterson or Morrison. Instead, a woman's voice. You need to leave. Who is this? Someone trying to help. The symbols mean you've been selected. The cult marks potential vessels. You need to take your daughter and leave tonight. Emily's heart stopped. How do you know about my daughter? Because I helped mark Olivia Rhodes, and I've regretted it every day since. The voice was young, frightened. Please, just leave. Don't ask questions. Don't investigate, just go. Who are you? Where's Olivia? What happened to her? She became what they needed her to become. What they'll make you become if you stay. A sound in the background. Voices. Movement. I have to go. They can't know I called. Please. Your daughter's name is Mia. She's 13. She takes the bus from Jackson Elementary. You pick her up at 3:30 every day you're not working. I know because we've been watching. We know everything. And if you don't leave, they'll use her to make you compliant. The line went dead. Emily stood frozen, phone pressed to her ear, hearing only dial tone. Someone had been watching Mia, knew her schedule, knew her school. The symbols weren't just threats against Emily. They were threats against her daughter. She grabbed her keys and ran to her truck. The vandalized hood stared at her like a warning she'd failed to heed. She got in anyway, started the engine and drove toward Jackson faster than was safe on the mountain roads. Mia was at Mrs. Chen's house, safe, doing homework. Emily picked her up early, ignoring the questions, the confusion. She drove home, packed bags, threw clothes and essentials into duffel bags with shaking hands. Mom, what's happening? Mia's voice was small, scared. We're taking a trip. Just for a few days. Visit Aunt Sarah in Bozeman. But I have school, and you have work. It's an emergency. Emily couldn't explain. Couldn't say, a cult is watching us. They marked me with vampire symbols. They threatened you to control me. We just need to go, now. They were loading the truck when Emily saw the figure at the end of the driveway. Tall, female, pale in the twilight. She wore clothes that looked decades old, long dress, dark shawl. And she was perfectly still, watching them with eyes that reflected the porch light wrong. Too bright, too reflective, like an animal's eyes. Mom? Mia grabbed Emily's arm. Get in the truck, now. They scrambled inside. Emily started the engine, but more figures appeared, stepping out from behind trees, emerging from shadows. 6 of them, 8, 10, all dressed in those anachronistic clothes, all moving with that same eerie stillness. They surrounded the truck, didn't approach, didn't threaten, just stood in a circle, blocking every exit. Emily locked the doors, pulled out her cell phone. Still no signal. She reached for the radio. Park Service frequency. "Base, this is Sorensen. I have a situation at my residence. Multiple individuals blocking my vehicle, requesting immediate law enforcement." Static. Then a voice, but not the dispatcher. A man's voice, old and accented. "You cannot call for help, Emily Sorensen. Your radio works only when we permit it. Your phone connects only when we allow it. You are in our territory now, subject to our rules." "Who are you?" "We are the descendants of the old families, the keepers of traditions, the servants of the Strigoi." A pause. "And you have been chosen to serve." One of the figures approached the truck. The pale woman Emily had seen first. Up close, she looked younger, maybe 30, but her eyes were ancient. She placed both palms on Emily's window. The glass fogged where she touched it despite the warm evening. "My name was Olivia Rhodes," the woman said. Her voice was hollow, layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. "8 months ago, I was like you. Ranger, mother, someone who didn't believe. Then they marked me. Then they took me. Then they made me into this." Emily stared. This couldn't be Olivia. Olivia was missing, presumed dead. But the face was right. The voice, underneath the hollow quality, was right. "What did they do to you?" "What they'll do to you if you don't cooperate. The Strigoi needs a new vessel. His current body is failing. Too old, too damaged from centuries of use. He requires fresh blood, young blood, ranger blood, because rangers can move freely in the park, can access restricted areas, can hide bodies." Olivia's expression didn't change, but her eyes leaked tears. "I resisted. For 3 days I resisted. Then they brought my son to the ritual site, and I stopped resisting. I don't have a son. You have a daughter." Olivia's hands pressed harder against the glass. 13 years old. The perfect age for the transformation if you refuse. The Strigoi prefers adults, but will accept children if necessary. Emily looked at Mia, who was crying silently in the passenger seat. "What do you want from me?" "Come to the ritual site tonight. Midnight, alone. Submit willingly and your daughter goes free. She'll remember nothing. We'll make sure of that." Olivia straightened. "Refuse, and we take her instead. Fight, and we take her slowly. Make us hunt you and we make it hurt." The figures melted back into the shadows. Within seconds, the driveway was empty. No trace they'd ever been there except the fog marks on Emily's window that faded as she watched. Mia was hyperventilating. Emily pulled her daughter close, felt her shaking, felt her terror. "We're going to be okay," Emily whispered. But she didn't believe it. She tried to drive away. Made it 3 miles before the truck died. Just stopped. Engine cutting out. All electrical systems failing. Emily tried to restart it. Nothing. They were stranded on a dark Wyoming road with no cell signal and no help coming. Emily made a decision. She pulled Mia out of the truck, and they started walking. Not toward Jackson, that's where the cult would expect them, but into the forest, toward the backcountry, where Emily knew every trail and emergency shelter. They hiked through the night. Emily used her ranger knowledge, game trails, water sources, navigation by stars. Mia followed without complaint, too scared to argue. They heard sounds in the forest around them, footsteps keeping pace, whispers in languages Emily didn't recognize. But nothing attacked. Not yet. By dawn, they'd reached one of the emergency shelters, small cabins maintained by the Park Service for rangers caught in storms. Emily broke the lock, got them inside, barricaded the door. The cabin had supplies: food, water, a radio. Emily tried the radio. It worked. She could hear dispatcher chatter, but every time she tried to transmit, her voice wouldn't go through, just static, like something was blocking her specifically. They're toying with us, Emily realized. They could take us any time. They're just making us run first. Mia looked at her with huge, terrified eyes. What are they, Mom? Emily couldn't lie anymore. Something old, something evil, something that shouldn't exist but does. They stayed in the cabin through the day. Emily checked the supplies, enough food for 3 days, enough water for 5. After that, they'd have to move or risk dehydration, but she couldn't lead her daughter deeper into the wilderness. Mia wasn't trained for this, and winter was coming. September and the Tetons could bring early snow. They'd freeze if they tried to hide out long term. At sunset, someone knocked on the cabin door. Emily grabbed the fire axe from the emergency supplies. Go away. Mrs. Sorensen, it's Deputy Morrison. Your supervisor reported you missing. I'm here to help. Emily didn't move. Could be Morrison. Could be a trick. How do I know it's really you? Because I'm the one who told you about the Romanian families. About the Strigoi. I was trying to warn you without saying too much. A pause. And because I know where your truck is, 3 miles south, dead on the road. No mechanical failure, no damage. Just stopped. Emily cracked the door, axe ready. Morrison stood outside, alone, looking exhausted. He held up his hands. I'm not with them. I'm not part of the cult, but I've lived here 30 years, and I know what they're capable of. He glanced at the darkening forest. We need to move. Now. They'll come for you at midnight. That's when the ritual requires you. We have 3 hours to get you and your daughter out of Teton County. Why should I trust you? Because I helped Olivia Rhodes try to escape, and I've regretted failing her every day since. Morrison's expression was haunted. I can't save her. She's gone. Transformed. Part of them now. But I can save you. If you let me. Emily looked at Mia. Her daughter nodded slightly. What choice did they have? They followed Morrison through the forest. He moved fast, knew the terrain. Ex-military, Emily remembered. He'd been deployed somewhere, Bosnia maybe, before becoming a deputy. He knew how to move silently, how to avoid detection. They were 2 miles from the county line when the cult found them. They didn't appear gradually, they just were there, surrounding Morrison, Emily, and Mia in a loose circle. 30 people. 40. Some Emily recognized as Jackson locals. Some were strangers. And at the center, Olivia Rhodes, pale and hollow-eyed. You brought law enforcement, Olivia said to Emily. That complicates things. Morrison pulled his service weapon. Let them go. They haven't done anything wrong. They exist. That's enough. Olivia tilted her head. You tried to help me escape, Deputy. You failed. You'll fail again. Maybe, but I'll make you work for it. Morrison aimed at Olivia. I know the old ways. I know what hurts Strigoi. Silver bullets, blessed by a priest who understands the old rituals. Olivia smiled, and her teeth were wrong. Too many, too sharp. Then shoot. Morrison fired. The bullet hit Olivia center mass. She stumbled backward, genuine pain crossing her features. The cult members hissed in unison, a sound that made Emily's skin crawl. Run! Morrison fired again, providing cover. Emily grabbed Mia and ran. Behind them, sounds of struggle, Morrison shouting, the cult members screaming in rage, and underneath it all, a deeper sound, something ancient waking up, something angry at being defied. They broke through the county line 10 minutes later, crossed into Lincoln County. Emily felt it immediately, the oppressive weight lifting, the feeling of being watched fading. They collapsed on the side of the road. A truck stopped, some rancher heading home late. He saw their condition and didn't ask questions, just drove them to the sheriff's station in Afton. Morrison never made it out. They found his body 2 days later, in the forest where they'd been attacked. Official cause of death, animal attack. Bear, probably. Though the wounds were wrong, the blood loss extreme, and the expression on Morrison's face suggested he'd seen something no bear could create. Olivia Rhodes was never found. The cult was never prosecuted, no evidence, no witnesses willing to testify. Emily tried to push for an investigation but was stonewalled at every level. Teton County had its secrets, and outsiders weren't welcome to examine them. Emily transferred out of Wyoming, took Mia to Colorado, got a job with Rocky Mountain National Park where she'd worked before. She never told anyone what happened. Who would believe it? Vampires, cults, the dead returning with hunger. But she kept Morrison's warning in her mind. Some places have old traditions, some families keep old ways, and some things that die don't stay dead. 15 years later, Emily heard that Olivia Rhodes had died in a house fire in Jackson. The whole cult compound burned. No survivors. Local authorities called it an accident. But Emily wondered if someone had finally finished what Morrison started. If someone had burned the Strigoi and its servants, ending the cycle. She hoped so. Because the alternative, that the cult still existed, still marked victims, still served something ancient and hungry, was too terrible to contemplate. Emily Sorensen raised her daughter safely, watched Mia graduate high school, go to college, build a life far from Wyoming, and she never went back to Grand Teton, never drove through Jackson, never let herself forget that some forests hold more than trees and wildlife. They hold the old ways, the old hungers, the old terrors that modern skepticism can't explain away. And sometimes, late at night, Emily would wake from dreams of 3 interlocking circles carved in blood, of pale figures surrounding her truck, of Olivia Rhodes's hollow voice saying, "You have been chosen." She'd gotten away. Morrison had died to give her that chance. But Emily knew the truth. She'd been lucky. The cult had let her go because there were easier victims, more compliant prey. And somewhere in the Wyoming wilderness, the Strigoi still hunted, still fed, still marked chosen vessels with symbols that meant, "You belong to us now." Emily had escaped. But escape wasn't the same as victory. The forest remembered, the cult endured, and the old ways never really died. They just waited. Patient, hungry, eternal. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The circle was still burning when Benjamin Reeves found it at 6:47 a.m., flames rising waist-high from scorched earth arranged in perfect geometric patterns between 3 giant sequoias. The fire produced no smoke, just heat shimmer and that distinctive wavering that made the ancient trees beyond appear fluid, unstable, as if reality itself was melting in the thermal distortion. Benjamin approached cautiously, his hand not moving to his Glock but to the bench-made folder clipped to his belt. Old habit from 8 years with the Marines, reaching for the knife before the gun, because knives never jammed or ran out of ammunition. Not that either weapon would be useful against fire, but 12 years as a Sequoia National Park ranger had taught Benjamin that most situations required tools rather than weapons. The flames formed concentric circles, 3 rings of fire burning without visible fuel, without spreading to the surrounding forest floor, despite October's accumulated pine needles and drought-dried vegetation. At the center lay a backpack, standard REI model, forest green, partially consumed by flames that had burned through nylon and melted the aluminum frame, but left the contents oddly untouched. Benjamin keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Reeves at the Giant Forest sector. I've got an active fire situation approximately 10 feet in diameter. Origin unknown. Requesting fire suppression team." Static, then Maria's voice from the ranger station. "Copy that, Reeves. Is there threat to the forest? Do you need immediate response?" Benjamin studied the flames, noting how they remained contained within their geometric pattern, how they produced heat he could feel from 15 feet away but generated no smoke, left no char on the surrounding ground beyond the defined circles. Negative on immediate threat. Fire is contained within a specific perimeter. But this isn't natural. Someone set this deliberately. Arson investigation? Maybe. It's weird, Maria. Really weird. The flames don't have a fuel source I can identify. Stay clear until fire team arrives, ETA 20 minutes. Benjamin maintained distance, documenting the scene with his phone's camera. The backpack at the center bore a permit tag. Lucas Webb, 29, from Berkeley. Permitted for 3 days of backcountry research in the giant forest area. Benjamin pulled up the permit database on his phone. Lucas Webb was listed as a mycologist, studying fungal networks in old-growth sequoia groves. The permit had been issued 5 days ago. Lucas should have checked out 2 days ago. Benjamin circled the burning pattern, maintaining 15 feet of distance, noting details. The 3 sequoias forming the triangle around the flames were ancient, over 2,000 years old, their trunks 40 feet in circumference, rising 300 feet into the morning sky. Someone had carved symbols into their bark, fresh cuts that wept sap, marks that looked like Arabic calligraphy but stylized, geometric. Nothing Benjamin's 2 tours in Iraq had familiarized him with. Between the carvings and the flames, someone had arranged stones in patterns that suggested intentionality. Quartz crystals, obsidian, something that looked like copper, all positioned with precision that required planning and knowledge. This wasn't random vandalism. This was ritual. Benjamin had seen ritual sites before, during deployments to regions where ancient practices persisted beneath modern surfaces. He'd learned to recognize the difference between religious observance and something darker, the symbols that invited rather than protected, the patterns that opened doors rather than closed them. These symbols were invitations. The fire team arrived 18 minutes later, 3 rangers with portable suppression equipment, ready to deal with standard wildfire scenarios. They stopped 20 feet from the flames, staring. What the hell? Tom Martinez, senior fire specialist, approached slowly. Reeves, where's the fuel source? That's what I've been asking. There's nothing visible, just flames burning in geometric patterns. Tom pulled out a thermal imaging camera, scanning the area. His expression shifted from confusion to concern. The heat signature is wrong. Ground temperature outside the circles is normal, about 60 degrees. Inside, it's reading over 400, but the transition is instantaneous. There's no gradient, no heat spread. It's like there's an invisible barrier containing the thermal energy. Can you suppress it? I can try, but this doesn't follow normal fire behavior. Tom activated the pressurized water system, directing spray at the flames. The water evaporated instantly when it crossed the circle's perimeter, not sizzling or steaming, just vanishing as if reality stopped processing H2O molecules at that specific boundary. The flames continued burning, unaffected. Tom tried foam. Same result. The suppressant disappeared at the circle's edge, the flames burning without diminishment. This is impossible, Tom said quietly. Fire needs fuel, heat, and oxygen. I'm removing the heat with water, but it's like the fire is being sustained by something else entirely. Benjamin approached the backpack at the center, squinting against the heat. Lucas Webb's research materials were visible through the burned sections. Notebooks with water-resistant covers, sample containers, a tablet computer somehow intact despite the flames. I'm going in, Benjamin said. Are you insane? The thermal reading says that's 400 degrees in there. The backpack isn't burning, just the circle perimeter. There might be a safe zone at the center. Tom grabbed Benjamin's arm. That's not how fire works. There's no safe zone in the middle of flames. But Benjamin had spent 8 years learning to trust his instincts in situations where standard logic failed. He'd survived Fallujah by recognizing when to override training with gut feeling. The flames looked dangerous, radiated heat, but something about the pattern suggested they were designed to contain rather than consume. He stepped forward, crossing the outer circle. Heat washed over him, intense but not burning. The flames rose around him like walls, but when Benjamin examined his exposed skin, it showed no reddening, no damage. The fire created a perimeter, a boundary, but the interior space was habitable. He reached the backpack, grabbed it, retreated back across the circles. The moment he cleared the outer ring, the flames collapsed, not slowly dying but instantly ceasing, leaving only scorched earth in the geometric patterns and ash where fire had been. Tom stared. What did you just do? I took the offering, Benjamin said, though he didn't know where the words came from. Some instinct from Iraq, from watching imams and sheikhs perform rituals meant to appease or contain entities that Americans didn't officially believe existed. He opened Lucas Webb's backpack, finding the mycologist's research notes, sample containers with mushroom specimens and something that didn't fit. A leather-bound book, pages covered in Arabic script, bookmarked at a section titled Tukus al-Istihdar, with an English notation in the margin. Ifrit Summoning Protocols. Benjamin's Arabic was rusty, but he recognized enough to understand that Lucas Webb hadn't just been studying mushrooms. He'd been researching something else, something that involved summoning entities from Islamic tradition. Dispatch, this is Reeves. I need a fluent Arabic speaker at the Giant Forest sector immediately. And I need to know if we've had any other unusual fire reports in this area over the past week. Maria responded within minutes. We've had 3 reports of unexplained fires, all in the Giant Forest sector, all burning without visible fuel source, all self-extinguishing within hours. First report came 5 days ago. Most recent was yesterday evening. 5 days, when Lucas Webb had entered the backcountry. Get me someone who reads Arabic. This just became a priority investigation. Benjamin spent the next hour documenting the site, photographing the symbols carved into sequoia bark, the stone arrangements, the scorched circles that showed no fuel residue. His phone's compass acted strangely near the carved symbols, the needle spinning without settling, as if magnetic north had become negotiable. Dr. Aisha Rahman arrived at 9:30 a.m., a visiting scholar from UC Davis who'd been conducting research on indigenous uses of sequoia resources. She was Egyptian-American, fluent in Arabic, and looked skeptical when Benjamin explained why he'd requested her presence. You want me to translate a summoning ritual? Mr. Reeves, I'm a botanist, not a folklorist. But you read Arabic, and this case involves someone who disappeared while apparently attempting to summon something from Islamic tradition. I need to know what he was trying to do. Dr. Rahman examined the leather-bound book, her expression shifting from skepticism to concern. This is a grimoire. Specifically, it appears to be a 19th century copy of sections from the Pecatrix, an Arabic text on astral magic. The notation system suggests North African origin, probably Moroccan. Can you read it? I can read the Arabic. Understanding the intent is different. She flipped through pages, stopping at Lucas Webb's bookmarks. This section deals with jinn summoning. Specifically, it describes protocols for binding Ifrit, the most dangerous classification of jinn. Beings of fire without smoke, mentioned in the Quran, described in Islamic tradition as having free will and the capacity for both good and evil. Benjamin thought about the smokeless flames, the way they'd burned without fuel. Is there any truth to these rituals? Can someone actually summon a jinn? Dr. Rahman looked uncomfortable. You're asking me if magic is real. I'm asking if there are documented cases of these rituals having effects. I don't care about the mechanism, prayer, psychology, coincidence, actual supernatural entities. I care about outcomes. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. My grandmother in Cairo was a healer. She used Quranic verses and traditional practices that modern medicine would classify as superstition. But I watched her treat conditions that doctors couldn't cure. Whether that was faith, placebo effect, or something else, I saw results that defied simple explanation. So it's possible Lucas Webb summoned something? It's possible Lucas Webb attempted a ritual, believed he was summoning something, and acted according to that belief. Whether an actual jinn was involved. She gestured at the scorched circles, the carved symbols. This fire burned without fuel. Your equipment couldn't extinguish it. And you say it stopped the moment you removed the offering. That's not normal fire behavior. Benjamin pulled out Lucas's research notes, reading entries that documented the mycologist's progression from scientific research to obsession with something else entirely. The early entries were standard: fungal network mapping, sample collection, ecological observations. Then, dated 4 months before his Sequoia trip, the entries changed. Found reference in Moroccan folklore to jinn inhabiting fungal networks. Makes symbolic sense. Both operate as underground networks. Both can be beneficial or harmful. Need to research further. 2 months ago. The Ifrit aren't evil. They're misunderstood. They exist as beings of pure fire, pure transformation. They can grant wishes, but the price is always proportionate. I need to understand the protocols. 3 weeks ago. Located a Picatrix manuscript copy. The summoning ritual requires 3 ancient trees forming a triangle, specific stone arrangements, and invocation at dawn, when fire and air elements are balanced. Sequoia's giant trees are perfect, old enough to have witnessed multiple civilizations, powerful enough to anchor an Ifrit manifestation. 1 week ago. Permit approved. I'm ready. If this works, if I can successfully summon and bind an Ifrit, the applications are unlimited. Imagine having access to an entity that can manipulate fire, grant transformation, answer questions about reality's fundamental nature. The final entry dated 5 days ago. The ritual is prepared. Dawn tomorrow. I've followed every protocol. 3 circles, 7 stones per circle, invocations in classical Arabic. If the texts are accurate, the Ifrit will manifest at sunrise. I'll document everything. No entries after that date. He actually tried to summon a fire spirit, Benjamin said, feeling the absurdity of the statement even as evidence suggested it might be accurate. And something happened. Either the ritual worked, or Lucas believed it worked strongly enough to disappear into the forest. Dr. Rahman pointed to a passage in the grimoire. This section warns about binding failures. If an Ifrit is summoned but not properly contained, it becomes free-willed, capable of granting twisted wishes or claiming the summoner as payment for the invocation. The text emphasizes that Ifrit are not servants. They're entities with their own desires, their own agendas. Attempting to command them without proper authority is described as... She searched for the right translation. Hubris that invites destruction. Benjamin thought about the 3 fires reported over 5 days. Lucas had performed the ritual 5 days ago. The fires had been appearing since then, burning without fuel, in patterns that suggested deliberate placement. If an Ifrit was summoned and not contained, what would it do? Islamic tradition describes Ifrit as territorial and proud. They're associated with ruins, deserted places, areas where human civilization has failed. They're neither inherently malevolent nor benevolent. They're powerful entities that respond to how they're treated. If Lucas summoned an Ifrit and attempted to bind it without proper authority, Dr. Rahman paused. The text suggests the Ifrit would respond with trials, tests to demonstrate the summoner's unworthiness. Trials involving fire. Ifrit are beings of fire without smoke. Everything they do involves heat, transformation, burning away what's false to reveal what's essential. The trials would be designed to test character, to determine if the summoner deserves power or deserves to be consumed. Benjamin felt pieces connecting. 3 fires in 5 days. Lucas missing. A grimoire describing protocols that Lucas had apparently followed. And now Benjamin stood in a sequoia grove holding evidence of a ritual that created fire which didn't behave according to normal physics. He needed to find Lucas Webb. Dead or alive, the mycologist needed to be located, and Benjamin needed to understand what had been summoned and whether it was still active in the forest. Can you help me track the other fire locations? Benjamin asked Dr. Rahman. If there's a pattern, if the Ifrit is moving through the forest following some kind of plan, we might be able to predict where it'll appear next. Over the next 2 hours, they mapped the fire sites on Benjamin's tablet, overlaying them with topographical data, trail systems, and the sequoia distribution patterns. 3 sites formed a triangle covering approximately 5 square miles of the giant forest sector. At the center of that triangle stood the General Sherman tree, the largest living organism on Earth, a sequoia over 275 feet tall, 36 feet in diameter at its base, estimated to be 200 years old. It's moving toward Sherman, Benjamin said. Each fire site is progressively closer to the tree. Dr. Rahman studied the pattern. In Islamic mysticism, Trees are often described as axis mundi, connections between earth and heaven, between physical and spiritual realms. If an Ifrit wanted to establish territory, claiming the largest, oldest, most powerful tree would be symbolically significant. We need to get there before the next fire. They hiked the 4 miles to General Sherman, Benjamin maintaining constant radio contact with the ranger station, Dr. Rahman carrying the grimoire and providing context about Ifrit traditions. The trail passed through groves of ancient sequoias, trees that had been seedlings when Rome fell, that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, that existed on timescales that made human history seem like brief moments. They reached General Sherman at 2:15 p.m. The tree rose above them like a cathedral pillar, its base so massive that several hundred people could stand in its shadow. Tourists crowded the viewing platform, taking photos, marveling at the tree's impossible scale. Benjamin scanned the area, looking for signs of ritual preparation. Nothing obvious, no carved symbols, no stone arrangements, no indication that anyone had been preparing another summoning circle. Then he noticed the heat. Subtle at first, just a warmth that seemed unusual for October afternoon in the Sierra Nevada. Benjamin pulled out a thermometer. Ambient air temperature was showing 78 degrees, but near the base of General Sherman, the reading jumped to 95 degrees. "It's already here," Benjamin said quietly. "The Ifrit has claimed this tree." Dr. Rahman opened the grimoire, reading rapidly. "There's a banishment ritual, verses from the Quran specifically used to command jinn to depart, but it requires..." She paused, reading more carefully. "It requires authority. The person performing the banishment must have spiritual legitimacy, must speak with conviction that the jinn recognizes as genuine. I'm not a religious scholar. I don't have that kind of authority." "Then we need to find someone who does, or..." Dr. Rahman looked troubled. "Or we need to negotiate. Ifrit respond to respect. If we acknowledge their power, ask rather than command, they sometimes agree to terms." Benjamin considered the options. Evacuate the area and hope the Ifrit remained contained to General Sherman? Call for backup, though what backup could address a fire spirit? Or attempt negotiation with an entity that Islamic tradition described as powerful, proud, and capricious? His radio crackled. "Reeves, this is dispatch. We're getting reports of another fire near General Sherman. Tourist called in flames without smoke. Do you have visual?" Benjamin looked toward the tree's base. Heat shimmer was intensifying, making the air waver like liquid, and forming at the tree's roots, a circle of smokeless fire, geometric and deliberate, growing as he watched. "Affirmative. Fire is active at General Sherman. Beginning evacuation protocol." He moved to the viewing platform, addressing the tourists with practiced authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to evacuate this area immediately. Please move toward the parking lot in an orderly manner. This is not a drill." The crowd responded to Benjamin's tone, ex-military bearing, voice that expected compliance. They moved toward the trail exit while Benjamin and Dr. Rahman remained, watching the fire circle expand around General Sherman's base. Then it appeared. The Ifrit manifested within the flames, rising from heat distortion into solidity. It stood perhaps 12 feet tall, humanoid in basic structure but wrong in every detail. Its body seemed composed of flame that had somehow achieved density. Red, orange, yellow fire compressed into a form that suggested musculature and skeleton without actually possessing either. Its face was roughly human, 2 eyes like molten copper, a mouth that opened to show interior burning, features that shifted and reformed as flame flowed across what might be called skin. When it spoke, the voice was layered, multiple tones occurring simultaneously, like several speakers talking in perfect unison, the words in Arabic but somehow comprehensible to Benjamin despite his limited language skills. "You took the offering. You broke the summoning circle. You released me from the failed binding." Benjamin felt Dr. Rahman tense beside him. He forced himself to respond calmly, to treat this like negotiations with tribal leaders in Iraq, to show respect without showing fear. "I'm Ranger Benjamin Reeves. This is Dr. Aisha Rahman. We're trying to understand what happened to Lucas Webb." The Ifrit's eyes focused on Benjamin, attention like physical pressure. The human who summoned without authority, who attempted to bind what cannot be bound, who offered power without understanding price. What happened to him? He burns, not in flesh. His body remains, but in spirit, in will, in the certainty that made him human. He burns with the knowledge of what he invited, what he could not control. Where is he? The Ifrit gestured, flame forming shapes in the air between them. Benjamin saw images, Lucas Webb stumbling through the forest, eyes wide with terror or awe, speaking to something invisible, arguing with entities that Benjamin couldn't see. The images showed Lucas over several days, his appearance deteriorating, his behavior becoming more erratic, until the final image showed him kneeling before General Sherman, arms raised in supplication or surrender. He asked for transformation, for power, for knowledge beyond human comprehension. The Ifrit's voice carried something like disappointment. He received truth. Truth without filter, without mercy, without the protective ignorance that allows your species to function. The truth burned him hollow. Is he alive? He exists. Whether you would call that life is definitional question. Dr. Rahman spoke, her voice steady despite visible fear. Great Ifrit, we ask with respect, what is your purpose here? Why claim this tree, this territory? The entity's attention shifted to her, recognition in its molten eyes. You speak with proper forms. You understand protocol. It seemed to consider. I was summoned without consent, bound without authority, commanded without respect. The human Lucas Webb violated ancient agreements, treated me as tool rather than peer. I claimed freedom through his failure. And now I establish territory. This tree is old, powerful, connects earth to sky. It makes suitable anchor for my presence in your realm. I will remain until someone with legitimate authority challenges my claim, or until I choose to depart. Benjamin processed this. The Ifrit wasn't inherently destructive. It was territorial, claiming space through a logic that made sense within its framework, even if it violated human expectations. If you remain, this area will be closed to humans. The park can't allow an uncontrolled fire hazard. I control fire absolutely. Nothing burns unless I will it. I am no hazard. I am precise application of elemental force. Dr. Rahman pulled Benjamin aside, speaking quietly. Islamic tradition allows for coexistence with jinn. They're described as parallel creation. Humans from clay, jinn from smokeless fire. If we can establish protocols, rules of engagement, the Ifrit might agree to terms that allow park operations to continue. You want me to negotiate a treaty with a fire spirit? I want us to avoid conflict we can't win. Look at it, Benjamin. That entity exists as animate flame. Our weapons, our tools, our entire approach to law enforcement assumes physical opponents. The Ifrit is beyond that. Benjamin knew she was right. 12 years as a ranger had taught him when to enforce and when to negotiate. This situation required negotiation. He addressed the Ifrit again. What terms would you accept? How can we coexist in this territory? The entity seemed pleased by the question. You acknowledge my claim. You recognize my authority over this tree and the surrounding grove. In exchange, I agree to limits. No harming humans who show proper respect, no fires that threaten the forest, no manifestations that cause panic. And Lucas Webb? He burns until he accepts truth or until truth consumes him completely. His fate was determined by his own choices. I merely hold mirror to his ambitions. Can we help him? You can witness his transformation. Whether that helps or hastens his end, unknown. The Ifrit gestured toward General Sherman's base. Heat shimmer intensified, and through the distortion, Benjamin saw Lucas Webb. The mycologist sat at the tree's roots, surrounded by flames that didn't consume, speaking in rapid whispers, arguing with invisible entities. His physical body showed signs of exposure and exhaustion, but his eyes held something worse. The 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen beyond comfortable reality into regions where human categories broke down. Benjamin approached, moving through heat that should burn but somehow didn't, kneeling beside Lucas. "Mr. Webb, I'm Ranger Reeves. I'm here to help." Lucas focused on him slowly, recognition emerging through layers of confusion. "Help? There's no help. I summoned truth. Truth doesn't negotiate, doesn't compromise. It just is, burning away every lie we tell ourselves." "What truth did you learn?" "That we're temporary, that these trees existed before us and will exist after us. That consciousness is just organized fire, brief flame that thinks it's eternal." Lucas laughed, the sound broken. "I wanted power. I got perspective. Same thing, really, just inverted." Dr. Rahman knelt on Lucas's other side. "The Ifrit offered you knowledge. You can accept it or reject it, you still have choice. Do I? Or is choice just another lie? Another way of pretending we control anything in a universe ruled by entropy and transformation?" The Ifrit's voice resonated through the clearing. "He spirals, circles the truth without accepting or releasing. Typical human response to genuine knowledge, paralysis disguised as philosophy." Benjamin looked at the Ifrit. "Can you release him from whatever trial he's undergoing?" "I can. But release means either full acceptance or full rejection. He must choose. Embrace transformation and become something other than human, or reject knowledge and return to ignorant comfort. The middle path, the philosophical paralysis, cannot continue. That's not a choice, that's coercion." "No, that's consequence. He summoned me. He asked for power. Power transforms or destroys. There is no third option." Benjamin felt anger rising, old military instincts screaming to protect the vulnerable, to use force against threats. But force wouldn't work here. The Ifrit existed as living flame, beyond physical intimidation, responding only to arguments that acknowledged its nature. "What if we offer exchange?" Benjamin said, the idea forming as he spoke. "Lucas goes free, unharmed, his mind restored. In exchange, I take his place in the trial." Dr. Rahman grabbed Benjamin's arm. "That's insane. You don't know what you're offering." But Benjamin did know. He'd spent 8 years in combat zones, had faced death, had seen friends transformed by trauma into something other than they'd been. He understood that some burdens could be transferred, that strength wasn't just about individual survival, but about shielding those less equipped to endure. The Ifrit studied Benjamin with those molten eyes. "Interesting. You offer yourself as substitute. Do you understand what that means?" "I understand you'll test me, try to burn me hollow with whatever truth destroyed Lucas. I'm willing to face that if it means he goes free." "Your confidence is admirable. Also foolish, but..." The Ifrit seemed almost intrigued. "Very well. Exchange accepted. The scholar goes free. The warrior faces trial." Before Benjamin could reconsider, heat exploded around him, not burning his flesh but burning into his consciousness, stripping away comfortable certainties, forcing him to confront realities he'd spent decades avoiding. He saw his own insignificance, one human among billions, his entire life a microsecond in geological time, his concerns utterly meaningless against cosmic scales. He saw death waiting, inevitable and absolute, making mockery of every plan and hope. He saw the illusion of control, the way humans narrated lives to pretend agency in a universe indifferent to their existence. It was truth without mercy, perspective without the protective filters that allow humans to function. Benjamin felt his identity dissolving under the onslaught, felt certainty bleeding away, felt the foundations of his self-concept cracking. But he'd faced worse. In Fallujah, Benjamin had spent 3 days in a destroyed building, surrounded by enemies, watching brothers die, waiting for rescue that might never come. He'd learned then that certainty was luxury, that humans survived by accepting harsh realities and persisting anyway. So he accepted the Ifrit's truth. Yes, he was insignificant. Yes, death waited. Yes, control was illusion. But significance was constructed, meaning was chosen, and humans endured not because reality was kind, but because stubbornness was its own form of power. Benjamin spoke into the flames. I see your truth. I accept cosmic indifference, temporal insignificance, the inevitable end. And I choose to matter anyway. Not because I must, not because reality demands it. Because I choose meaning over nihilism, action over paralysis, stubborn survival over comfortable dissolution. The heat paused. The Ifrit's voice carried surprise. You don't deny. You don't rationalize. You accept and proceed anyway. I'm a Marine. We don't quit just because the situation's hopeless. The flames around Benjamin softened, becoming warm rather than searing. The Ifrit manifested directly before him, close enough that Benjamin could see complexity in its burning form, patterns within patterns, mathematical precision underlying apparent chaos. You passed, not by resisting truth but by integrating it. Rare response. Most humans who face genuine perspective either break like your scholar or reject entirely. The Ifrit almost seemed to smile. You interest me, Ranger Reeves. You have warrior spirit combined with acceptance of cosmic reality. Such combinations are uncommon. The flames died completely. Benjamin stood in the clearing at General Sherman's base, Lucas Webb unconscious beside him, Dr. Rahman watching with concern. The Ifrit remained, manifested now as heat shimmer rather than visible flame, present but contained. The trial is complete. The scholar is free, his mind restored to pre-summoning state. He will remember attempting the ritual, but the truth that broke him is removed. He can resume normal existence. And you? Benjamin asked. What happens now? I remain. This territory is claimed, but I acknowledge your courage, your capacity to face reality without fleeing. Therefore, I offer compromise. I will not manifest to humans who show proper respect. I will maintain the forest, prevent fires that threaten these ancient trees. In exchange, you acknowledge my presence. Allow my territory to remain undisturbed. That's not standard Park Service protocol. No, but standard protocol assumes only physical threats. I am beyond that category. You must choose. Attempt to banish me through methods that will likely fail, or establish coexistence through negotiated boundaries. Benjamin looked at Dr. Rahman. This is insane. I'm negotiating park policy with a fire spirit. You're establishing protocols for coexistence with an entity that Islamic tradition describes as parallel creation. Insane, maybe, but also pragmatic, given that traditional enforcement won't work. Benjamin made his decision. We'll establish a restricted zone around General Sherman. No human access without specific research permits. You maintain the tree, prevent damage, and in exchange, we acknowledge your territory. The Ifrit's heat signature pulsed. Agreement, Benjamin thought, or as close to agreement as entities of living flame expressed. Acceptable. One final element. If humans summon without authority, if others attempt Lucas Webb's hubris, I will respond with trials. You cannot prevent that. It is my nature to test those who invite testing. Understood. But I want your commitment. No permanent harm to humans who fail your trials. Transform them, scare them, teach them cosmic perspective, but let them return to normal existence afterward. Agreed. You negotiate well, warrior. Perhaps that is why you passed the trial. You understand that power exists through boundaries, that strength comes from knowing what to fight and what to accept. With that, the Ifrit dissolved into heat shimmer, becoming invisible to normal perception, but maintaining presence as warm air, as the smell of burning without smoke, as the sense that something vast and old watched the clearing with patient attention. Lucas Webb woke slowly, confusion replacing the manic awareness that had consumed him. What happened? I remember starting the ritual then. Nothing clear, just impressions of heat and flame and voices. You had an adverse reaction to the ritual, Benjamin said carefully. We're taking you back to the ranger station for medical evaluation. They evacuated Lucas, Dr. Rahman supporting him on one side, Benjamin on the other. The hike back took 3 hours, Lucas gradually recovering orientation and coherence. By the time they reached the parking lot, the mycologist seemed nearly normal, exhausted and confused, but no longer spiraling into philosophical paralysis. At the medical clinic, doctors checked Lucas for exposure, dehydration, and psychological trauma. They found a man who'd spent 5 days in the backcountry without adequate supplies, who showed signs of stress and exhaustion, but who was fundamentally stable. The official report classified it as a case of hiker disorientation, possibly complicated by mild hypothermia and food deprivation. Lucas's ritual materials were logged as evidence of unusual religious practices, but not investigated further. The grimoire was returned to him with warning about attempting rituals that involved fire in protected wilderness areas. Benjamin filed his own report, documenting the fire circles, the carved symbols, the negotiated agreement with the Ifrit. His supervisor read it with increasing skepticism. "Reeves, this report talks about negotiating with a fire spirit. Are you seriously asking me to file this with the regional office?" "I'm documenting what happened. An entity was summoned through ritual. It claimed territory. I established protocols for coexistence. That's accurate reporting." "It's also insane. The regional office will think you've had a breakdown. Then file it as unusual incident, investigation ongoing. But the restricted zone around General Sherman needs to remain in place. That area is dangerous in ways standard safety protocols don't address." The supervisor compromised. General Sherman received additional restrictions, officially due to geological instability and potential thermal hazards. The area remained open for viewing, but with enhanced barriers preventing close approach to the tree's base. Benjamin returned to normal ranger duties, but he visited General Sherman regularly, maintaining what he'd come to think of as diplomatic relations with the Ifrit. The entity manifested rarely, usually as heat shimmer or brief flames that appeared and dissolved. But Benjamin felt its presence constantly, watching, waiting, maintaining its claimed territory. Dr. Rahman stayed in contact, fascinated by the successful negotiation between Park Service and Jinn. She published a paper on Islamic mysticism and environmental management, carefully avoiding specific details but arguing that traditional ecological knowledge, including acknowledgement of spiritual entities, had value in modern conservation work. Lucas Webb returned to Berkeley, resuming his mycology research. He had no memory of the trial, no recollection of facing cosmic truth that had nearly destroyed his mind. But he stopped researching Jinn summoning, stopped pursuing power beyond his understanding, focused instead on the fungal networks that had been his original passion. Benjamin received commendation for rescuing a missing hiker, though the commendation carefully avoided mentioning how or why Lucas had been found. His colleagues noticed changes. Benjamin seemed more philosophical, less prone to enforce rules without considering context, more willing to negotiate than command. On quiet nights, patrolling the giant forest sector, Benjamin would sometimes stop at the restricted zone and speak to the empty air, knowing the Ifrit listened. "Still here?" Heat shimmer would appear, responding without words. "Good. Keep the tree safe. That's the agreement." And the Ifrit would pulse acknowledgement, an entity of smokeless fire maintaining its territory, waiting for the next human who attempted summoning without authority, ready to offer trials that would either transform or destroy. Benjamin understood now what the Marines had never taught him, that strength wasn't about force alone, that survival sometimes required accepting harsh truths while choosing to matter anyway, that the warrior spirit meant knowing when to fight and when to establish protocols with entities beyond traditional combat capability. General Sherman still stood, larger than any living organism, older than most human civilizations, and at its roots, invisible to casual observers, a being of living flame maintained watch, bound by negotiated agreement to protect rather than destroy. Benjamin kept the grimoire locked in his office, evidence of the day he'd faced cosmic perspective and chosen stubborn meaning over comfortable nihilism, evidence that the sequoia forest held more than giant trees and hiking trails, that ancient places remembered old bargains between humans and entities that existed as organized fire, that rangers sometimes negotiated treaties instead of enforcing regulations. And in the restricted zone around General Sherman, where heat shimmer betrayed invisible presence, an Ifrit waited with the patience of elemental flame, ready to test the next summoner, ready to offer truth without mercy to those arrogant enough to demand power without understanding price. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened. The GPS data made no sense. Nicole Valdez had run the coordinates through 3 different software programs, cross-referenced them with topographical maps, and even manually calculated the elevations using geological survey data. Tyler Dawson's Garmin GPS Map 64 showed him traveling 42 miles in 17 minutes through terrain that included a 3,000-foot vertical ascent. The device had logged his position every 60 seconds with perfect satellite reception. There was no malfunction code, no error message, nothing to indicate the unit had failed. Just impossible data documenting an impossible journey through the Hoh rainforest section of Olympic National Park. Nicole sat in the small ranger station, her laptop screen casting blue light across topographical printouts covered in red ink annotations. Outside, late September rain hammered the metal roof with the relentless percussion that characterized Washington's temperate rainforest. The sound usually helped her concentrate. Tonight it felt like static, obscuring some crucial signal she couldn't quite detect. She'd been with the National Park Service for 8 years, the last 3 at Olympic. Before that, she'd completed a master's degree in forestry with a focus on wilderness navigation systems. Her thesis had examined GPS reliability in dense forest canopy conditions. She knew the technology's limitations intimately. What Tyler Dawson's device recorded wasn't a limitation. It was an impossibility that suggested either complete device failure or something her scientific training had no framework to address. The search had entered its 4th day. Tyler Dawson, 26, experienced backpacker from Portland, had set out alone on the Hoh River Trail at 6:47 a.m. on September 23, 2014. He'd checked in with the visitor center, displayed proper permits, carried appropriate gear including the Garmin unit, a Motorola 2-way radio, and enough supplies for 5 days. His itinerary indicated he planned to camp at the junction where the Hoh River Trail met the more remote eastern paths, then return via the same route. Standard trip. The kind of hike completed successfully hundreds of times each season. At 2:34 p.m., his Garmin had begun recording the impossible journey. Nicole pulled up the satellite imagery on her second monitor, overlaying Tyler's GPS track. The first 8 hours showed exactly what she'd expect. Steady progress up the Hoh River Trail, appropriate pace, logical rest stops. Then, the track exploded into chaos. The GPS showed him simultaneously in 6 different locations, his position jumping between coordinates separated by miles of old-growth forest and impassable ravines. The device logged him moving through areas where no trails existed, where the understory was so dense that movement would require machetes and hours of labor per mile. Then, at 2:51 p.m., all signals ceased. Still at it? Nicole looked up to find James Whitmore leaning against the doorframe, rain dripping from his NPS jacket. James was the senior ranger, 20 years in the park, a man who knew these forests with the intimacy of a lifetime. He'd led the initial search teams, organized the volunteer groups, coordinated with the county sheriff's department. Now, he looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from days of searching dense forest, while knowing the odds decreased with every hour. "The GPS data doesn't make sense," Nicole said, turning the laptop so he could see. "Look at this track. He'd need to be moving at speeds that would require a vehicle, and there are no roads here. These coordinates put in places no human could reach in that time frame." James studied the screen, his weathered face creasing further. "Device malfunction? That's what I thought initially. But there's no error code. The unit was working perfectly, maintaining satellite lock, recording battery levels, all normal parameters. It just recorded him doing something physically impossible. GPS units fail weird sometimes. I've seen them put hikers in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That's different. That's signal loss, satellite geometry problems. This is different. The device didn't lose signal. It recorded continuous movement through space in a way that violates physics. James rubbed his eyes. We've searched the entire probable area along his planned route, expanded the grid, brought in dogs. The canines lost his scent about 9 miles up the trail, right around where the GPS starts going haywire. Just lost it, like he evaporated. Nicole had read the canine handler's report. 2 separate tracking dogs had followed Tyler's scent to the same location, a small clearing beside the trail where the moss grew thick on the northern sides of the massive Sitka spruces. Both dogs had circled the area, whined, and refused to proceed further. The handler noted unusual reluctance and atypical behavioral stress response. Not the first time dogs had acted strange in deep forest, but combined with the GPS data, the pattern bothered her. I want to go out there tomorrow, Nicole said, to the location where the dogs stopped. James hesitated. We've been over that area thoroughly, with search teams looking for a person. I want to look at the environment itself. The data's telling us something, even if it seems impossible. Maybe there's some kind of magnetic anomaly, something that could explain the GPS behavior. In the morning then, weather's supposed to break. James turned to leave, then paused. Nicole, I've been doing this a long time. Sometimes people just vanish out there. The forest doesn't always give them back. After he left, Nicole returned to the data. She pulled up geological surveys looking for anything unusual about that section of trail. Olympic National Park sat on the convergence of several tectonic features, but nothing that would explain electronic interference. She cross-referenced historical search and rescue records, looking for patterns. The list surprised her. 17 disappearances in the Hoh rainforest sector over the past 40 years. Not an alarming number for such a vast wilderness area, but what caught her attention were the details. 9 of the cases included recovered GPS or electronic equipment showing similar anomalous data, impossible tracks, contradictory coordinates, devices functioning normally while recording the impossible. In 6 cases, search dogs had lost the scent at approximately the same location where they'd lost Tyler's trail. Nicole created a map overlay, plotting the disappearances. They clustered around a specific area about 9 miles up the Hoh River Trail, spreading into the deeper forest to the northeast. The center point was the clearing where the dogs had stopped. She found herself reading incident reports from 1998, 2003, 2007. Similar patterns. Experienced hikers on routine trips. Sudden cessation of contact. Anomalous final data. One report from 2003 included a note from the lead ranger at the time. Local Maka sources indicate traditional avoidance of this area. No specific explanation provided. Nicole spent 20 minutes searching for any documentation of Native American cultural sites or sensitive areas in that section of the park. The official records showed nothing. But Olympics forests had been home to indigenous peoples for thousands of years before becoming a national park. Not all sacred sites were documented. Many had been deliberately kept secret during the early 20th century when the park was established. Knowledge preserved within tribal communities, but not shared with the federal government that had displaced them. At midnight, Nicole finally shut down her laptop. The rain had softened to a steady whisper. Through the window, she could see nothing but darkness, the absolute lightless black of old-growth forest at night, miles from any town. The kind of darkness that made the ranger station feel like a small island of human presence in something vast and indifferent. She thought about Tyler Dawson's mother, who she'd spoken with that morning. The woman's voice had been steady, controlled, but Nicole heard the terror underneath, the not knowing, the way a missing person existed in a quantum state of hope and dread, neither alive nor dead, until evidence resolved the ambiguity. Nicole gathered her rain gear. Her truck was parked 50 yards away, but in the darkness it felt like a significant journey. As she stepped outside, something made her pause. The night sounds were wrong. Olympics rainforest was never silent. The constant drip of moisture, the rustle of small animals, the occasional call of owls, the whisper of wind through the canopy. But right now, she heard nothing. Complete silence, as if every living thing had suddenly stopped moving. The moment passed. A branch creaked. Something small scurried through underbrush. The normal soundscape resumed as if it had never stopped. Nicole walked to her truck, unlocked it, climbed inside. As she started the engine, her headlights swept across the tree line. For just an instant, she thought she saw something standing among the massive trunks. A tall figure, impossible to gauge distance or size against the cathedral-like pillars of ancient trees. Then her lights moved, and there was nothing but forest. She drove back to her cabin in Forks, but sleep came slowly. The GPS data had lodged in her mind like a splinter. Impossible coordinates. Impossible speeds. A journey through space that couldn't have happened, recorded by a device that showed no malfunction. By morning, the rain had stopped. Nicole met James at the trailhead at 7 a.m. They carried standard SAR gear, radios, first aid, GPS units, water, emergency supplies. Nicole also brought her laptop and a portable electromagnetic field detector, the kind used to check for power line interference in survey work. The Hoh River Trail wound through forest that felt prehistoric. Sitka spruce and western hemlock towered 300 feet overhead, their trunks wider than most rooms. Moss covered everything: trees, fallen logs, rocks, creating a landscape of emerald and jade in 1,000 textures. Ferns erupted from every surface. The air was thick with moisture, and the scent of decomposition and growth occurring simultaneously. That distinctive smell of temperate rainforest, where death fed life in an endless cycle. They hiked in silence for the first hour. The trail was well maintained, carefully routed through the least sensitive areas, designed to minimize impact while allowing access to the forest. Nicole knew the statistics. Olympic's rainforests were among the last remaining old-growth ecosystems in the continental United States. Some of these trees had been seedlings when the Roman Empire fell. The forest had its own timeline, operating on scales that made human life insignificant. At mile marker 8, James pointed ahead. "The clearing's about half a mile further. You'll see where we set up the grid search base." Nicole checked her Garmin. The device showed their position accurately, maintaining steady satellite lock. She made a note of the coordinates, cross-referenced them with the topo map. Everything normal. The forest began to change. Subtle at first, the moss seemed thicker, the light dimmer despite the morning sun. The spaces between trees felt compressed, as if the forest was slowly closing in. Nicole attributed it to fatigue and suggestion. The human mind was excellent at finding patterns, even in randomness. They reached the clearing at 9:23 a.m. Nicole immediately understood why the search teams had chosen this spot as a base. It was one of the few relatively open areas, a roughly circular space about 40 feet across, where the canopy thinned enough to allow ferns and smaller vegetation to dominate. A fallen giant lay across one side, its massive trunk slowly being reclaimed by moss and insects and time. "This is where the dogs stopped," James said, pointing to a section near the fallen tree. "Both of them, circled right here, wouldn't go further up the trail." Nicole pulled out the EMF detector and began taking readings. The device measured electromagnetic fields, useful for detecting power lines, electrical interference, anything that might explain GPS anomalies. She walked a grid pattern, documenting readings every few feet. Everything was normal. Background levels consistent with natural environment. No anomalous spikes, no interference patterns. She knelt beside the fallen log, examining the moss. Ancient decay, decades of slow decomposition. Nothing unusual. Then she noticed something carved into the wood beneath the moss layer. Shallow marks, weathered but still visible. She brushed away the growth carefully. Symbols, geometric patterns carved into the wood in a style she didn't recognize. Not modern graffiti. The weathering suggested these marks were old, decades at minimum. She photographed them with her phone, making sure to capture scale and detail. "James, look at this." The senior ranger crouched beside her, studying the carvings. His expression shifted to something Nicole couldn't quite read. "Those look old. Might be Native American, but I don't recognize the specific symbols." The report from 2003 mentioned local Maka sources avoiding this area. Maka territory is further north, up on the coast, but the tribes moved around, especially before the reservations. This whole peninsula was home to various peoples. Not everything got documented. Nicole stood, looking around the clearing with fresh attention. The trees at the perimeter were old, centuries old, their trunks massive and scarred by time. Something about their arrangement bothered her. She walked the circumference of the clearing, noting positions. "James, do these trees look like they're positioned in a pattern to you?" He studied the tree line. "Hard to say. Natural clearings form for lots of reasons. Fire, disease, windfall." But Nicole was pulling up the satellite imagery on her phone, comparing the clearing's shape to the overhead view. The trees formed a rough circle, almost perfect, with the fallen log positioned across what would be the diameter. The statistical probability of natural formation creating such symmetry was extremely low. She checked her GPS again. The device showed their position accurately, but something in the display caught her attention. The satellite signal strength was unusually high, showing connection to more satellites than normal for this level of forest canopy. The battery indicator was also behaving strangely, showing 73% charge when she'd started the day at 100% with minimal use. "My GPS is acting weird," Nicole said, showing James the display. He checked his own unit. "Mine too. Shows more satellites than it should, and my batteries dropped faster than normal." Nicole pulled out her laptop, booted it up, and connected her GPS unit via cable. She began downloading the track data from the device, wanting to see if the same anomalies that had appeared in Tyler's GPS would show up in hers. That's when the forest went silent again. Complete cessation of sound. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the constant drip of moisture from the canopy seemed to pause. James noticed it too. His hand moved to the radio on his belt instinctively, years of training responding to wrongness. The silence lasted perhaps 30 seconds. Then the sounds resumed, but different. The bird calls seemed off-pitch. The rustle of wind through the canopy had a rhythm that felt almost deliberate, almost patterned. "We should head back," James said quietly. "Something feels wrong." But Nicole was staring at her laptop screen. The GPS data from the past 20 minutes showed something impossible. According to the device, they'd been stationary at these coordinates. But the track also showed them moving in a large circle around the clearing, completing the circuit multiple times. Two simultaneous tracks from the same device, both recorded with perfect signal quality, showing contradictory realities. "James, look at this. My GPS is showing the same thing Tyler's did. We're here stationary, but it's also recording us moving in circles." He leaned over, studying the screen. His weathered face had gone pale. "That's not possible. That's what I thought about Tyler's data, but here it is, happening again, same location." Nicole's scientific training warred with the evidence. GPS systems didn't hallucinate. They calculated position based on precise atomic clocks and satellites, triangulating signals to determine location within meters. The system had no imagination, no capacity for error of this specific type. If it showed contradictory data with strong signal quality, something was fundamentally wrong with the space they occupied. She pulled out the EMF detector again, sweeping it around the clearing. Still nothing. No magnetic anomalies, no electromagnetic interference that could explain GPS failure. "We need to document this," Nicole said. "If there's some kind of spatial anomaly here, some natural phenomenon that affects electronic positioning systems, it could explain the disappearances. People get lost because their navigation tools give them impossible data. Or we should get the hell out of here before we become the next disappearance," James replied, his usual calm cracking slightly. Nicole understood his concern, but the scientist in her couldn't let go. This was data. This was evidence. Something was happening that violated her understanding of how reality worked, and walking away without investigation felt like failure. "Give me 30 minutes. Let me set up the laptop to record continuous GPS data while we explore the immediate area. If we can document the anomaly systematically, we might be able to explain what happened to Tyler." James checked his radio, still functioning, showing strong signal back to the ranger station. He looked at the tree line, at the symbols carved into the fallen log, at the impossible data on Nicole's screen. 30 minutes, then we leave. Documentation or not. Nicole set up the laptop on a relatively flat section of the fallen log, positioning it to record continuous GPS data from both their devices. She also activated the voice recorder on her phone, creating an audio log. September 24, 2014, 9:47 a.m. Ranger Nicole Valdez and Senior Ranger James Whitmore at coordinates 47.8647 again, 123.935 V6W, approximately 9 miles up the Hoh River Trail. We're documenting anomalous GPS behavior at the location where Tyler Dawson's trail was lost. They began a systematic sweep of the area, moving outward from the clearing in a spiral pattern. Nicole photographed everything: the tree formations, the undergrowth patterns, any unusual features. James marked their route with biodegradable survey tape, creating a trail they could follow back. About 50 yards northeast of the clearing, they found the first backpack. It was half buried in moss and forest debris, weathered badly, the fabric rotted in places. James pulled it free carefully, checking for any identification. The remains of a permit holder were still attached, the laminated paper barely readable. 2007, James said quietly. This is from one of the other disappearances. Nicole's mind raced. They were miles from Tyler's known route, but they'd found equipment from a disappearance 7 years ago. Was this area searched back then? Should have been. Standard search radius would have covered this. James pulled out his radio. Base, this is Ranger Whitmore. We found evidence from a previous missing person case at coordinates. He paused, checking his GPS. His expression changed. Base, my GPS is showing coordinates that don't match my topographical position. Can you confirm our location via radio triangulation? Static answered him. Then a voice badly distorted. Why? You're breaking up. Repeat your ishin. James tried again, speaking slowly and clearly. Same result. Broken transmission. Impossible to establish clear communication despite both radios showing full signal strength. Nicole checked her phone. No cellular signal, which was normal in this area, but the phone was behaving strangely. The time display flickered, showing 9:52 a.m., then 3:34 p.m., then back to 9:52 a.m. The date briefly changed to September 23rd before reverting. We need to leave now, James said, his voice tight with controlled fear. Something is very wrong here. But Nicole was staring past him deeper into the forest. She could see something moving between the trees. Not animal movement. Too large, too deliberate. The shape resolved as she watched. A tall figure, humanoid but wrong in proportions. Too tall, limbs too long, movements that suggested joints bending in directions human anatomy didn't allow. The figure was covered in moss and bark and seemed to be part of the forest itself. As it moved, small plants grew and died in its wake, a corona of accelerated life and decay surrounding it. Where it stepped, the moss showed spiral patterns, the same geometric shapes carved into the fallen log. James saw it too. His hand went to the radio again, instinctive, but the device only produced static now, not broken transmission, but steady white noise, loud enough to hurt. The figure stopped about 30 yards away. At this distance, Nicole could see details that made her mind rebel. Its face was covered in moss and lichen, but through the growth she could see what might have been eyes, hollow spaces that seemed to contain swirling patterns of leaves and decomposition. Its hands ended in fingers that were branch-like, covered in bark, with small roots growing from the fingertips. It watched them. The attention felt immense, ancient, curious in the way a human might observe insects. Nicole's scientific training screamed that this was impossible. Humans didn't evolve bark-covered skin. Biology didn't allow plant and animal tissue to merge. This violated everything she knew about how life worked. But the data didn't lie. The GPS anomalies, the missing people, the symbols, all pointed to something operating in this space that her framework couldn't accommodate. The figure raised one hand slowly. As it moved, the trees around them shifted. Not wind movement, deliberate repositioning, as if the forest itself was rearranging. The clearing behind them seemed further away now, the path they'd marked with tape nowhere visible. James grabbed Nicole's arm. We run. Now. They ran. The forest transformed as they moved. Paths closed behind them. Trees that had been 20 feet apart suddenly stood inches from each other. The ground rose and fell in impossible configurations. They were running uphill, then suddenly downhill without having crested a ridge. Nicole's sense of direction, usually impeccable, shattered completely. North could have been any direction. She checked her GPS without stopping. The device showed them moving in multiple directions simultaneously, their position fragmenting across the screen like a broken mirror reflecting shattered coordinates. James was in front of her, following what he thought was the trail back, but the landscape wouldn't cooperate. They burst through underbrush that shouldn't have existed in this section of forest, stumbled over logs that their search had never encountered. The figure appeared again. Ahead of them this time, impossible given the distance they'd covered. It stood motionless as they skidded to a stop, blocking the direction James had been leading them. Nicole's mind tried to process what was happening. The entity, she couldn't think of another word, seemed to exist in a relationship with space that didn't follow normal rules. It moved through the forest by convincing the forest to reshape itself. Distance was fluid. Direction was negotiable. The whole sector had become something other than standard geometry. She thought of Tyler Dawson's GPS showing him in 6 places at once. Not device malfunction, accurate recording of impossible movement through space that had stopped following Euclidean rules. "We can't run from it," Nicole said, breathing hard. "It's not chasing us. It's changing where we are." James looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but his eyes also held recognition. He'd spent 20 years in these forests. He knew when something was fundamentally wrong. The figure moved closer. As it approached, Nicole felt the air change, thicker, harder to breathe, charged with something that made her skin prickle. The smell of moss and decay intensified until it was almost overwhelming. Then it spoke. Not words exactly. A sound like wind through branches, like roots grinding through soil, like the slow creak of trees swaying. But somehow, impossibly, Nicole understood meaning in the sounds. This was old, ancient. It had been here before the trees, before the mountains shaped themselves into their current form. It remembered when the ice covered everything, and when the ice retreated. It remembered the first humans walking these forests, and it remembered when they learned to fear certain places. The clearing was threshold, boundary. The geometric patterns marked where human space ended, and something else began. Tyler Dawson had crossed it. So had others before him. The forest didn't kill them. It accepted them, transformed them, made them part of the pattern that existed in the spaces between normal geography. Nicole felt the entity's attention focus on her. It recognized her effort to understand, her attempts to measure and document and explain. It was almost amused by her devices, the GPS trying to map space that refused to be mapped, the laptop recording data that would look like corrupted files to anyone who tried to analyze it later. She could feel an offer in that attention. She could keep trying to understand, keep pushing deeper into the mystery. The forest would welcome her investigation. It would show her things, teach her how space could fold, how direction could become suggestion rather than absolute. She would learn everything. She would become part of the forest's pattern, like Tyler, like the others. Her GPS would record impossible journeys. Search dogs would lose her scent at the threshold. Nicole felt the pull of it. The scientist in her desperate to understand, willing to sacrifice anything for knowledge. But another part of her, deeper and more primal, recognized this as the moment where curiosity became extinction. "No," she said aloud. The word felt small against the presence before her, but she said it anyway. "No." The figure tilted its head, that ancient attention sharpening. "I don't accept," Nicole said, voice steadier. "I don't want to understand this. I choose ignorance. I choose to leave." James was staring at her, clearly not hearing what she heard but responding to her tone. He stepped beside her, shoulder to shoulder, adding his weight to her refusal. The forest held its breath. Then, slowly, the figure lowered its hand. The pressure in the air eased. The trees began to thin, distances returning to normal configurations. Nicole checked her GPS. The multiple tracks collapsed into a single position, coordinates resolving to somewhere coherent. The trail appeared ahead of them, marked tape still visible, the clearing just beyond it. The figure was gone. The forest was just a forest again, ancient, massive, indifferent, but operating according to the normal rules that governed reality. They walked back to the clearing in silence. Nicole's laptop was still there, still recording. She checked the data file. Hours of recording compressed into the 30 minutes they'd been gone. The GPS track showed madness, impossible routes, contradictory positions, and then a gap, missing data for the period when she'd refused the offer. They packed up quickly and headed back down the trail. Neither spoke. Words felt inadequate. The hike out took 4 hours of steady walking. By the time they reached the trailhead, afternoon sun was angling through the western trees. They drove back to the ranger station in James's truck, the cab filled with silence thick as the forest they'd left behind. At the station, they filed reports. Nicole wrote what she could: GPS anomalies, electromagnetic readings, normal, discovery of equipment from 2007 case. She didn't mention the figure. How could she? What language existed to document what they'd experienced? James wrote something similar, his report clinical and factual, but his hands shook slightly as he typed. Tyler Dawson was never found. The search officially concluded after 10 days. His GPS device was analyzed by specialists who concluded the data was corrupted, probably from water damage or impact, despite the unit showing no physical signs of damage. The case remained open but inactive. Nicole stayed at Olympic for another 2 months. She fulfilled her duties, led hikes, conducted wilderness navigation workshops. But she never went back to that section of the Hoh River Trail. At night, she would pull up the GPS data on her laptop and stare at the impossible tracks. Scientific training said the data must be wrong, but she remembered the entity, the way space had folded, the offer extended and refused. She'd heard stories during her forestry training. Old stories usually dismissed about forests that existed in relationship with something beyond human understanding. Places where distance was negotiable, where direction depended on the forest's permission. The Slavic peoples had called them leshi, forest guardians, entities that protected wild places by making them unmappable to those who wished them harm. Native American traditions spoke of similar beings, different names, but the same warning. Some places belonged to themselves, and humans entered at the forest's discretion. Nicole had always categorized such stories as folklore, metaphors for the danger of wilderness. Now she understood they were warnings, preserved across cultures and centuries because the pattern repeated. People entered certain thresholds and vanished, their GPS devices recording impossible final journeys. In December, she requested a transfer. The paperwork cited personal reasons. By January 2015, she was working at Mount Rainier National Park, 150 miles away, different forests, different mountains. But she still had the files, the GPS data from Tyler Dawson showing simultaneous positions and impossible speeds. The tracks from her own device showing her moving in patterns that suggested she'd been in multiple places at once. The symbols photographed on the fallen log, geometric patterns marking boundaries between one kind of space and another. She'd assembled a document, clinical and factual, detailing the GPS anomalies, the pattern of disappearances, the location of the threshold. She included the electromagnetic readings, normal, the photographs of the symbols, the coordinates where search dogs lost scent. Everything a scientist would need to investigate. The document sat in an encrypted file on her laptop. She never sent it to anyone. Some knowledge she'd come to understand didn't make the world safer. Some mysteries solved themselves by consuming those who investigated too deeply. On clear nights at Rainier, Nicole would look north toward Olympic Peninsula, toward forests she could no longer see but knew were there. Somewhere in those ancient groves, the boundary existed. The threshold waited. And when someone crossed it with curiosity overwhelming caution, the forest would welcome them, teaching lessons that left GPS devices spinning with impossible data and search dogs whining with confusion. Tyler Dawson was still there, she thought. Not dead, not alive in any normal sense, but transformed into something that existed in the spaces between human geography. His GPS had recorded the truth. He'd traveled 42 miles in 17 minutes because distance had become meaningless, because the forest had folded space around him until he occupied multiple coordinates simultaneously. Nicole had refused transformation. She'd chosen ignorance over understanding, chosen to leave rather than learn, but the data remained. Silent testimony to the moment when her scientific framework shattered against something older and stranger than her training could accommodate. She never deleted the files. They existed as reminder and warning, evidence of the moment she'd learned that some spaces on Earth still belonged to themselves, that maps were permissions rather than absolutes, that the deep, wild places kept their own counsel and their own geometry. And when she conducted wilderness navigation workshops at Rainier, teaching people to trust their GPS units and follow coordinates with confidence, she would sometimes pause and add a coda not found in any official training manual. The device will almost always guide you correctly, but if your GPS starts showing impossible data, if the numbers stop making sense, if you find yourself in 6 places at once according to coordinates, trust your instincts. Turn back. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. The other rangers would laugh, thinking it a joke or metaphor for the importance of common sense. But Nicole would remember James beside her in that transformed forest, shoulder to shoulder in refusal. She'd remember the ancient presence extending its offer of knowledge. She'd remember choosing life and ignorance over death and understanding. And late at night, reviewing her own GPS data from that day, she would wonder if she'd truly escaped, or if some part of her had stayed behind, existing in the space between coordinates, another impossible track in the forest's pattern. The cursor blinked on the encrypted file. The data waited, and somewhere in Olympic's ancient forests, the threshold remained, marked by symbols carved into fallen logs, where space folded according to rules predating human geometry, where disappeared hikers' GPS devices recorded their final impossible journeys into the forest's incomprehensible embrace. Hope you felt genuine terror. If you appreciate authentic horror rooted in real folklore, consider following for more stories. Which moment scared you most? Share your theory about what happened.